Once there were 4 children named Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the home of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. Oh yeah, hi. Hello, come on in. I was expecting you. I'm just beginning a story about a place where there's an unending winter and it's cold. So you better get yourselves cozy and you can pull up a chair or sit on the floor. Yeah. And my name is Crazy Baba. It's a name my granddaughters made up for me because I guess I don't mind looking silly every once in a while. Oh, anyway, I write stories and poems, but today I'm going to tell you a story that was made up by someone else before I was even born. And it's a story about magic and mythical beasts and adventure and children. Kind of like other stories you may have heard. This story takes place in the land of Narnia. And there's a whole series of books written about this other reality called the Chronicles of Narnia by a man named C.S. Lewis. His first name was Clive. So when I was a child, my father gave me all of these books and I read them and I loved them. And so I read them again. And then I read them again. And when I had children, I couldn't wait to read it to them. And now my children are reading it to my grandchildren. So this story is a part of me, like stories have been for people like us for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, a good story makes us recognize something, and it lives then inside of us. This story is taken from the second book in that series, a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The lion is a lion named Aslan, a magnificent, noble, enormous, golden lion who was the one who created Narnia by using his warm breath to sing out the stars and the sun and the land and the forests and the plants and the animals. And the witch is the white witch whose name is Jadis, who was born long before Narnia was even created. And then she came and took over the land of Narnia and cast a spell, making it forever winter. And never Christmas. And the wardrobe is the way that the 4 children from our reality found their way into Narnia and eventually helped to save it from the spell of the White Witch. So, as I was reading when you came in, the story begins when Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are sent away by their parents during the summer holidays to stay safe in the middle of the countryside. And they're sent to the home of an old professor who has a head of shaggy white hair, and he lives in a house with endless rooms that are mostly lined with books. And he lives there with only a housekeeper and 2 servants who help him maintain this huge place. And when the children arrive and meet the professor, they like him immediately. The first full day that they're there, it rains. So they decide to explore the house. And Lucy, who's the youngest one, wanders off by herself. And soon she comes across a room that's bare of everything except an old wardrobe. Now, you probably don't know what a wardrobe is because it's an old-fashioned piece of furniture. It's like a closet. Oh, here, I'll show you a picture I made. So it opens up and you can hang your clothes in it and store things, but it stands up by itself against a wall. So she saw this wardrobe and she was very curious. So she crossed the room and opened the doors. And there, hanging in the wardrobe, she saw a row of old coats, mostly long fur coats. And Lucy loved the feeling of fur. So she stepped up into the wardrobe and rubbed her face against the fur coats. And then she saw that there was another row of coats hanging behind them. She thought, this must be a very deep wardrobe. So she held out her hands to try to feel the back of the wardrobe, but she couldn't feel it. So she stepped forward, and as she stepped, she felt something crunching under her feet, and she thought, oh, maybe that's some old mothballs that were left in the closet. And so she stooped down to touch them. They were cold. And as she stepped forward to try to feel the back of the wardrobe, she was no longer rubbing against soft fur, but against something hard and rough and prickly. It felt like trees. Then she sees a light ahead of her, not just a few inches away, but in the distance. And something cold and wet is falling on her. And suddenly she finds she's walking through a forest at night. And there's snow falling all around her, and snow on the ground, and snow on the trees. And as she walks forward, she sees that there's a lamppost standing in the middle of the forest. And she says, "My goodness, what is a lamppost doing in the middle of a forest? In the middle of nowhere?" And suddenly she becomes a little afraid. So she turns over her shoulder, and she can still see the coats hanging in the wardrobe and the light coming from the room behind. As she stood looking at the lamppost shining brightly, she began to hear the patter of soft footsteps coming towards her. And suddenly, a very strange person stepped into the circle of lamplight. He was just a little taller than Lucy herself, and he had a charming face, and he was carrying an umbrella over his head that was white with the snow. And under the other arm, he carried brown paper parcels. And from the waist up, he looked like a man. But his legs were like those of a goat, and they were covered with black, shiny hair. And instead of feet, he had hoofs. And although she couldn't see it at first because he was carrying the umbrella and had it hooked over his arm so it wouldn't get wet with the snow, he had a tail. And he had lovely curling brown hair. And out of each side of his forehead grew a little horn. And as he saw Lucy standing there, he was startled and said, "Goodness gracious me!" He's puzzled. And he asks, "Who are you?" And she says, "Well, I'm Lucy." And he says, "Are you a girl?" Of course I'm a girl," she replies. Still puzzled, he says, "So you're a human child then?" And she says, "Yes, I guess I am." And he says, "So how did you come into Narnia?" And he has to explain that Narnia is where they are. And he says, "Did you come in through the wild woods to the west?" She says, No, I came through the wardrobe in the spare room." And now he's really puzzled. He thinks that wardrobe and spare room are some strange countries he's never heard of before. And Lucy says, "Oh, no, they're not countries. They're just right over there, and there it's summer and it's hot." And he says, "Well, here in Narnia, it's been winter forever and ever. Oh, and we mustn't stand here any longer. It's cold. And you must be getting quite chilly. Why don't you come back to my house and I'll make you something warm to drink and we'll have some cakes. And she says, oh, that sounds really lovely. But, oh, and what is your name? And he says, my name is Tumnus. So she says, oh, thank you, Mr. Tumnus. I think I will come back and get warm, but I mustn't stay long because my brothers and sister won't know where I am and they'll be worried. There was a fire burning in a small fireplace, with 2 armchairs placed in front of it. One for me, and one for a friend, said Tumnus. He makes some tea and toast with plenty of jam. And while they eat several cakes, he tells her about Narnia, where the dryads who live in the trees and the naiads who live in the streams and the centaurs who were half man and half horse danced till midnight in the forests while the fauns played their flutes for them. And the red dwarves had feasts and treasure hunts way down under the earth where they mined for gold and jewels. And in the summer, there were weeks of partying and just general happiness. Oh, he sighed. But all that was in the deep past. Now it's always winter. And then he brought out a strange flute made of reeds and began to play. Oh, goodness, Mr. Tumnus, I must have fallen asleep. It must be hours. Oh, I'm so sorry to stop your beautiful music, but I must go immediately. They'll be so worried. I meant to stay for only a few minutes. But Mr. Tumnus says, oh no, it's no good now. You can't go. I can't go? And then she looks at Mr. Tumnus, and his eyes are filled with tears. And the tears are beginning to run down his cheeks. And then he puts his head in his hands and he begins to howl and sob. Oh, Mr. Tumnus, please stop crying. Whatever is the matter? But Mr. Tumnus only kept crying. So she walked over to him and said, "Please, Mr. Tumnus, stop." And then she put her arms around him and lent him her handkerchief, which he used to wipe his eyes as he kept crying. And the handkerchief became so wet that he had to wring it out on the floor. And Lucy found that she was standing on a pool of water. "Mr. Tumnus," she said, "you must tell me why you are crying." "Oh, I'm such a bad fawn." "Oh, no, you're not a bad fawn at all, Mr. Tumnus. In fact, you're the nicest fawn I've ever met." "Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew what I have done." "What have you done?" I'm a kidnapper. I am in the service of the White Witch." "Who's the White Witch?" "She's the one who has Narnia under her thumb and has made it forever winter and never Christmas." "Oh, Mr. Tumnus, that's terrible." "But I have taken payment from her, and I have promised that if I ever found a human child in the forest, I would be nice to it, and I would invite it back to my home, and I would lull it to sleep, and then I would give it over to the White Witch." "Oh, but Mr. Tumnus, I'm sure you would never do such a thing." "Oh, but I have." "You have? I'm sure you would never do it again." "Oh, but Lucy, don't you understand? It's you that I've kidnapped. It's you. I pretended to be your friend, and I was just about to call to tell the White Witch that you were here." "Oh, but Mr. Tumnus, you mustn't. I must go home." "Of course. Now I realize that, now that I've met a human child, I could never turn you over to the White Witch. I will take you back to the lamppost. Do you think that you could find your way back from there?" "Oh, yes, Mr. Tumnus, I'm sure that I could."
back through the forest more quickly than when they had come, Mr. Tumnus saying, "We must be careful. Even some of the trees are spies for the White Witch." And when they came to the lamppost, Lucy peered through the trees until she could make out the coats hanging in the wardrobe and the light shining through the open door. So they shake hands, and Mr. Tumnus apologizes yet again for what he was about to do. "Oh, never mind," says Lucy. "I just hope nothing terrible happens to you on my account." And as they say goodbye, Mr. Tumnus says, "Oh, may I keep your handkerchief?" And Lucy says, "Of course." And she turns and begins to walk towards the light until she is no longer rubbing against hard, rough, prickly branches, but soft fur.
"I've come back! I've come back!" she repeats. "Whatever are you talking about? Hadn't you wondered where I'd been gone? I've been gone for hours and hours." "Oh, Lou," said Peter, "you've been trying to hide. If you want to hide from us, you have to stay hidden for more than just a moment so we can come and find you." "Oh, no. Really, I've been gone for almost the entire day." Edmund puts his finger to his head and says, "I think she's gone nuts." "Oh, Lucy," says Susan, "we saw you go into the spare room just a minute ago." "She's not crazy," says Peter. "She's just been making up a story. Have some fun, aren't you, Lucy?" No, it's a magic wardrobe. And there's a forest and a fawn and snow and a white witch and a place called Narnia. They're so taken by how intense she's become that they all decide to go in and see the wardrobe for themselves. They go into the spare room and open the wardrobe. They push aside the coats, and there is an ordinary wardrobe with a wooden back. Now they think that she's been fooling them and that she's lying. "Oh, Lucy," says Peter, "it was a good try at a hoax, but give it up." Lucy is so distraught that they don't believe her that she begins to cry. The next few days were miserable ones for Lucy. If she had just gone to the others and told them it had all been make-believe, they would have all made up. But she was much too truthful a little girl to do that. So the older ones didn't try to hurt her feelings, but Edmund could be mean and spiteful, and now he was. He teased her mercilessly, saying things like, well, Lucy, when you went to get your bowl out of the kitchen cupboard this morning, did you find another country? She could not enjoy the beautiful summer days and the picnics and the swimming and the tree climbing. Then the weather turned bad again, so they decided to play hide and seek. Susan, the oldest, was it. Lucy didn't mean to hide in the wardrobe, but she was curious, and she thought she would just take a peek. But just then, she heard the others coming. So she jumped inside and pulled the door behind her. But she did not shut the door all the way because she knew that it was very dangerous to hide yourself inside a closet. At that moment, Edmund walked into the room and saw her going into the wardrobe. He thought it was a great opportunity to be mean and continue to tease her about her imaginary country. So he walked to the wardrobe and opened the door and jumped inside and closed the door. He began feeling around in the dark for Lucy, but was surprised he couldn't find her. He decided to open the door a crack to let in some light, but now he couldn't find the door. He began to feel very uneasy and started groping around wildly, calling out, "Lucy! Lou! I know you're here. Where are you?" There was no answer. Then he noticed that the sound of his voice was no longer like the stuffy sound inside a small space, but more like an open air sound. At the same time, he noticed he was feeling surprisingly cold. And then he saw a light. Thinking the wardrobe door must have swung open on its own, he went towards the light. Instead of walking through the door of the wardrobe, he found he was walking out from the shadow of some thick, dark fir trees into an open area in the woods. And there was crisp, dry snow under his feet, and the branches of the trees were covered in snow. The sky overhead was a light blue of winter, and through the trees he saw the red sun just rising. It was incredibly still and quiet. Not even a bird was singing. As he stood there in that cold, silent woods, he remembered he was looking for Lucy. He thought how unpleasant he had been to her, about her imaginary country, which didn't seem to be imaginary after all. Since he was starting to feel very alone and scared, he decided he'd better try to make it up with Lucy so she wouldn't be angry with him and would come and help. "Lou," he said, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I see now you were right. Do come and make up with me." When there was still no answer, he thought to himself, "Oh, it's just like her to hold a grudge." He was just deciding he didn't much like this strange place Lucy had found and was turning to try to find the door and go back home when he heard the sound of bells far off in the woods. The sound came closer and closer, and then suddenly a sleigh swept into sight, pulled by 2 reindeer. It was a fine sight as it came towards him. The reindeer, the size of small ponies, had hair that was so white they were whiter than snow. They had a bright scarlet red harness covered with bells, and their antlers were covered in gold. A fat dwarf, dressed in white polar bear's fur and wearing a red hood, drove the sleigh. But most noticeable of all was a great lady, taller than any woman Edmund had ever seen, sitting on a high seat at the back of the sleigh. She was covered in white fur and had a golden wand in her hand and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white too, not just pale, but white like paper or white icing. And she had a very red mouth. It was a beautiful face, but cold and stern.
Stop! And what, pray, are you? My name is Edmund. Is that the way you address a queen? I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Not know the Queen of Narnia? Ah, you shall know us better from now on. But I asked, what are you? I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty. I'm at school, or I was. Now it's the holidays. But what are you? Are you some overgrown dwarf who's shaved its beard? No, Your Majesty, I never had a beard. I'm a boy. A boy? Well, yes, Your Majesty. How, pray, did you come to enter our kingdoms? I came in through a wardrobe, Your Majesty. A wardrobe? And what, pray, is that? Well, I just opened a door, and I found myself here. Ah, I've heard of such things. A door from the world of humans. Ah, but this could ruin everything. But he's just one small human. He's easily dealt with.
But then she changes her mind. She decides he might be of use to her.
Oh, my poor child. You look so very cold. Why don't you come and sit here beside me? And I'll put my mantle around you, and we can talk. Would you like something hot to drink?
Oh, yes, Your Majesty. At that, she took out a very small bottle from inside her wrapping and, holding it out over the snow, let a drop fall. It shone in the air like a jewel, and the moment it touched the snow, there was a hissing sound, and a jeweled cup appeared, filled with something that was steaming. As Edmund began to sip the delicious drink, he felt better. He could feel its warmth seeping right down to his toes.
Ah, but it's so boring to drink without eating. What would you like best in all the world to eat?
Oh, Turkish delight, Your Majesty.
Ah, Turkish delight it is.
The queen let another drop fall on the snow, and instantly there was a beautiful box. When Edmund opened it, he found a pile of the best Turkish delight. Each piece was more delicious than anything Edmund had ever eaten. While he was so preoccupied gobbling down each piece of Turkish delight, the queen got him to tell her that he had one brother and two sisters.
Well, one of my sisters actually has already been to Narnia, and she met a faun. And then she came back and she told us all about it, me and my brother and my sisters. But, no one else knows about it, and the others didn't believe her anyway.
I would love so much to meet your brother and sisters. Do you think you could bring them here to me? Of course, if you come again, I could give you more Turkish delight. You see, I can't give you any more now, because the magic only works once. But at my house, things are different.
Oh, please, let us go now, Your Majesty.
Oh, no. I'd much rather that you go and fetch them. You see, I have no children of my own, and I need a boy to raise as prince, so that he could become king of Narnia when I am gone. And he could wear a golden crown and sit on a throne and eat Turkish delight all day long. And you are by far the most handsome and smartest boy I have ever met. You would make the perfect prince.
Your Majesty, couldn't we just go back to your house now and start my training? We don't need the others.
A prince needs courtiers around him, and I would make your brother a duke and your sisters duchesses. and they would be your court.
Your Majesty, couldn't you please take me to your house now?
No! You must go back now and return with the others. There lies the lamppost. That way is the world of humans. Now, look over there. Do you see those two hills rising above the trees?
I think I can.
Between those two hills lies my house. When you return, all you have to do is walk towards them through the woods until you come to my house.
I'll do my best.
And remember, you must bring the others. If you do not, I shall be very angry. And by the way, don't tell the others about me. It will be fun to have a little secret between us. It will be a surprise. And when you return, you can just make up something to get them to go that way. And when you come to my house, you could say something like, "Oh, how charming! A house! Why don't we go in and see who lives there?" Or some such thing. You're such a clever boy. I know you can make up something. You see, if your sister has met a faun, she has probably heard some strange stories about me. Fauns are such terrible liars.
Oh, please, Your Majesty, couldn't I have just one more piece of Turkish delight to eat on my way back?
Oh, no! You must wait until you come back with the others. Drive on! Next time! Next time! Come soon! I thought we would come out into the sunshine to end this bit of storytelling. You see, that was just the beginning of the story about how the four ordinary children, like you, came to save the whole country of Narnia from the spell of the White Witch. As the story continues, the snow begins to melt, and birds begin to sing. What's happening? You can find out all about it by reading the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. You can find out about how the beavers come to help the children, and about their adventures in the palace of the White Witch, and about how Aslan appears in Narnia, the great, noble lion Aslan. We hope you do